Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, and I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and founder of the Blended Pledge. And I'm excited to be collaborating for another time with the team at TSG Fleet. Trace, welcome to the show. It's great to see you again.
Hello.
Awesome.
How are you?
Good. I think we've got a really great show today because you were just recently on Thoughts and Coffee just on Tuesday. So I can't wait to continue that conversation.
Definitely. I love collaborating with you. It's great to be back so soon.
Awesome. Well, Trace and I also spoke on Let's Talk Supply Chain in fall of last year, and we had a great conversation about what you do, what's going on in trucking. So if anyone missed that, go and check it out after today's live. It's episode 431, wherever you listen to the show, and gives a really great introduction to TSG. But today we're diving deeper into fleet unification. Now, in the face of ongoing disruption and uncertainty, fleet managers are apparently employing strategies that are less about innovation and more about resilience. According to Element's annual survey of fleet decision makers, the key message is that stability, cost efficiency, and gradual progress are driving the conversation right now. But how do you know what's right for you? And where do you start building that resilience in a notoriously fragmented space? Well, we're going to be shining a light on that today. Trace and I are going to be exploring how to consolidate your fleet management for efficiency, leverage technology to avoid delays, optimize capacity to stay competitive, as well as prioritize customer experience through reliability so that you can achieve that much needed resilience and position for future success. Now, we are going to be taking questions at the end of the discussion, so make sure that you put those in the comments. For now, we want to know where you are tuning in from, so put that in the comments and welcome. And then if you like the conversation, we want to see some fire emojis as well, like we do on Thoughts and Coffee. So after that housekeeping update, let's get started with an introduction. So Trace, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about TSG Fleet.
Well, I'm Trace Haggard. I'm the owner and founder of TSG Fleet Services. At TSG, we're a leading provider of secure fleet depots and maintenance solutions, operating as a one-stop shop for fleet parking and repair across Southern California and DFW Metro. We have just over 6 million square feet of terminal space. We offer full service parking for trucks, trailers, containers, whether it's wheeled or stacked. We also do a lot of industrial outdoor storage for heavy duty equipment. And we have a comprehensive maintenance and repair service available 24/7, 365.
Awesome. Such a great introduction. Like I said, if you want to know more, go and check out episode 431. So let's start with a little bit of context. Like broadly, what is happening in trucking right now? We're halfway through 2025. What are the biggest factors shaping the industry right now? Like what's on the top of everybody's minds?
I think we're in a phase of cautious stability. I think there's some modest growth on the horizon. Unfortunately, freight demand continues to flatten out. You know, volumes are expected to remain close to flat, maybe even slightly going down a little bit in certain sectors like dry van, and intermodal. Uh, I think we talked about it on Tuesday. I'm optimistic. I'm a
I
glass
was going to
half full
say,
right now. So I think, it's really quiet out there. And I think that's a time, we keep saying, okay, we've hit the bottom. It's gonna go skyrocketing up. I still think some capacity has to fall out of the market. I think there's overcapacity still, and that, holds rates down. And hopefully, there'll be some events in the very near future that, kind of lets, the capacity improve and more freight gets moved and rates start going up. We just haven't seen it happen on a more consistent basis. I think there's been a
right.
couple times in the last 6 months that it's improved, but not anything to, uh, you know, get excited about. really.
Right. Right. But you are cautiously
Unfortunately, I,
optimistic.
I'm
And that's
cautiously optimistic. Yes, exactly.
and there's some
Yeah.
events that could be happening between now and the end of the year that could help rebalance what's going on at the moment. If you're watching, I want to hear in the comments if there's any challenges that you are facing or how you feel about the market, because we want to hear from you as well. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges and risks coming out of all of this right now?
Well, I think, you know, tariffs is probably the biggest wild card right now.
Mhm,
The one,
mhm.
when you're in a uncertain market and you're adding more uncertainty to it, it puts everything on pause.
Right.
Everybody's strategic plans kind of get set aside, and you then you start questioning yourself about your plan for the year,
Mhm,
and that throws everybody off. And when you have uncertainty and you hesitate about your strategy, uh, that takes away from focusing on growth and cost cutting and all the things that help be run a profitable business.
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the articles that we didn't get to on Tuesday, because we had that really great question that we're going to ask a little bit later on in the show, was I think it was something like if a tariff goes up by 18 to 28%, I think it's, I don't know, 4%. It like, um,
It's for every 1% in a tariff is 0.15% in less freight demand or something to that effect,
right.
right? So
Yeah.
so if you have 22%, whatever that multiplies, that reduces freight demand by that factor. And like I said, just whether or not you can put an exact number on it,
Mhm.
just the fact that it's on and then it's off and then it's really high and then it's nothing, it's a lot less. You can't make a decision about, the beneficial cargo owner can't make a decision about how much product to send, right? And then that
Mhm.
leaves all the carriers and anybody involved in the shipping ecosystem, you know, in la la land, right? You're just waiting,
Yeah.
and when you wait, nothing moves, right? And,
Yeah.
in our industry, you need to have a lot of movement in order to have, a successful business.
Well, that's exactly what we do. I even have a sweater on over on our website that says I like to move it because that's what we like to do. We like to move cargo, right? So
Exactly.
how do you think businesses should be approaching the rest of the year? Like given where we are right now, given some of the biggest challenges and the risks that we just talked about, like what are your customers' priorities? What strategies are they putting into play? I remember on Tuesday we kind of talked about how some older vehicles are being left in fleets and things like that, which causes, some risk around maintenance and things like that. So they're definitely thinking about a few things that they're going to be doing and strategies that they're going to put into play. But what does that look like?
You know, I think I recently watched Shelly from JB Hunt. She had a call or earnings call or video recently, and I think that's the most effective strategy that she highlighted is you've got to prepare yourself for when the demand comes back, right? So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of you've got to get rid of your underutilized assets, and when you do that, that'll help drive down your maintenance cost, your storage cost, all those things related to things sitting around, all those costs related to units sitting around. You've got to get nice and lean, and then when demand increases, your profitability will increase, at the same time as your volume does. So I think that was a very a very insightful discussion she had. Um, yeah, so that's all right. Just be ready for the potential demand increase and make sure that you're lean and you have all those assets that suck up a lot of your cost because they're older assets. You're
Mhm.
getting rid of those, cycling through them.
And so hurry up and wait.
Well, yeah, that's exactly, it's frustrating, right? It's hurry up and wait. And I think while you're waiting, you just got to keep coming up with more ways to be more efficient, right? And then that's the silver lining in a freight recession, right? For everybody involved, from brokers to the beneficial cargo owners to the motor carriers, is that when you're really busy, right, you're really not focused, on your cost, measures as much as you should be, right? When volumes are up and there's, capacities, tight, I think, you're how much more revenue can we do, right?
Mhm.
And you lose sight of what that all costs. Um, so that's the silver lining right now is you get an opportunity to really focus on unifying your fleet, right? Making sure that you're consolidating everything so that you have less fragmentation when the market takes off again.
Well, and let's talk about that fragmentation, right? Because I think what we want to do is go from fragmentation. We want to think about consolidation, but then we're here today to talk about unification and what that means and what we need to be thinking about. So how have fleet operations become so fragmented? Like we talk about working silos, about tech silos. What's your take on how we've got to this point of over complexity? Like give us a paint us a picture of sort of where we are right now being so fragmented.
Well, I think it all starts around, I mean, probably a few years earlier than 2020 during the pandemic, but you could really put a target on 2020, right? I think, when times are really good, fleets, uh, they're not very proactive. Historically, fleet operators are much more reactive to market conditions than proactive. And when that rapid growth happens, they forget about unifying their standards, right? So most trucking companies, they expand piecemeal, right? As volume goes up, they start adding, trucks and trailers and containers, and then they have, units in multiple locations. And they really don't have a strategy as to
Right.
where they're parking them or where they're doing the maintenance. You know, uh, they just find someone somewhere to do it all in one place.
Well, and they're focused on execution, right? When you get really
Right.
busy, you're focused on customer service, execution, and delivery.
Yeah, and if you have multiple silos, right, then you're you're spread thin, right? You're all in a bunch of different places, and you're just putting assets in markets that are generating more revenue. And then when you're bringing on all these assets, in a hurry, typically is how it happens.
Mhm.
You have different systems, for your GPS log, your
Mhm.
maintenance technology, your dispatching software, your terminal management systems. It's all different technology, and there's real no underlying strategy to tie them all together.
Yeah. And so what's the impact of that fragmentation? Like what are the biggest problems it's causing for businesses right now? And I ask this question because I feel like when we get fragmented or we are in tech silos like you were talking about, you have different tech for different parts of the business and they're not necessarily talking to each other, things end up going back to manual,
Oh yeah.
right? That's
Yes.
when we start looking to go back to what we know, which is spreadsheets, which is misinformation, which is data sort of moving everywhere, which is what we don't want, right? In 2025, we're supposed to be bringing all of our data together and using it strategically. But I
Definitely.
feel like when it's fragmented, that's really the biggest impact is that we go back to manual, we go back to what we know, spreadsheets, upload, download, what version are we on? And it creates an environment of chaos and not necessarily strategy.
Definitely. It costs businesses severely in terms of efficiencies and profitability.
Mhm.
Um, I think when you have, poor visibilities, managers can't see their assets in real times across all the locations. So then you end up with underutilized trucks or trailers or containers. Um, Also, when you lack visibility, you have delayed repairs, right? So all these things snowball into downtime, and downtime is a real killer you know in our industry. And then in addition to that, you know, costs start to skyrocket because you just throw multiple solutions at the problem, right? And you have multiple vendors or multiple softwares, doing the same service, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, and then you probably really don't know your cost at that point, right? I mean, you're kind of operating in the dark. So, you don't know if the rate that you're charging for a lane is is enough to cover your cost if you can't,
Mm.
put a finger on what your costs are per lane. Um, so yeah,
Hmm.
it leads to a lot of overpayment, on
Mhm.
maintenance, storage, and the like.
Well, and unnecessary costs. And if we have units in places where they don't need to be, not only is it capital just sitting there, but then it also has costs to move it around to where it needs to be. And
Oh yeah.
unnecessary time spending on A, finding it probably, and B, having
Mhm.
to figure out where to move it to.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, it's still, one of the things that always blows my mind. When you know how much capability an enterprise can have to afford a system whereby they know where everything's at and when to use it. Um, that's still uh, very, it's not, or how do I say this? It's very common for fleets to reposition equipment because they don't have enough equipment in one place, and there's no revenue associated with that, right? You're betting on something happening in that other area, so you have to reposition a fleet that you weren't prepared to service that market or that lane. um,
Absolutely.
and that affects your cost, outside of, the downtime cost that you have with equipment sitting underutilized.
Well, and think about the lack of capacity at the moment. Nobody wants to have that happen right now because that's additional cost that you don't want to have to your bottom line right now. I just want to
Yes.
remind everybody who's watching, if you have any comments, questions, even some fire emojis, make sure to put those in the comments because we want to hear from you. Now, I know today we're talking about consolidation, we're talking about unification and fleet management. What do we mean by that? What exactly do we mean, Trace? I mean, let's get everybody on board with what how we're thinking about that.
Well, consolidation and unification, it means bringing your fleet elements, that's your trucks, your trailers, your containers, your chassis, under a single integrated framework. It's about centralizing your operations, like using one secure terminal network for parking and repairs instead of scattered lots. And that allows you to integrate tools for seamless data flow, right? So what we've talked about of the different silos, at TSG, our one-stop shop model, we unify the storage and maintenance and security across all of our sites. So you have full visibility wherever your equipment's at. Um, and that, it reduces the amount of vendors you have in those markets, and it creates a holistic view that streamlines workflows and decision making. And that all leads to profitability,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely. And
the word
everybody's
everybody's looking for.
yeah, everybody's looking at their bottom line right now. So that's exactly what they are looking for. And so what's the potential of that in consolidation for tackling, some of the problems that we're having with that fragmented fleet
You know,
management at the moment?
consolidation by, reducing your redundancies. That's a tough one, a tongue tired. Reducing your redundancies, right? I mean, that can cut your costs depending on the size of your fleet between 10 and 20%, um,
Wow.
by optimizing your asset placement and, boosting your resilience against disruptions. So,
Mhm.
and I'm sure there's even higher cost savings to that in certain markets.
Mhm.
Uh, but that's just, what we've seen for our customers, that are able to use our network is usually 10 to 20% in cost reductions. Yeah.
Well, and those are pretty big numbers when you think about the bottom line, you think about profitability, especially in the environment, the market that it's at right now. I mean, that's exactly what people are looking for. And that doesn't even take into consideration people's time that it takes, right? To, look for some of those units if you don't have something that's bringing everything together, consolidating it, unifying it, that's that sort of thing. And so technology is a big part of that unification. You kind of mentioned it. I think smart tech for fleet management can have a massive impact. So let's talk about the types of digital fleet management tools. What are the types that are out there that businesses can use to help tackle some of the challenges that we've talked about previously?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing now is, our customers are leveraging tools like telematics for real-time tracking. I mean, I know that's nothing new, but then now, more AI-powered component to those telematics, allowing them to do predictive maintenance, so they can forecast repairs. Um, an example is, a fleet uses their telematics with different types of IoT sensors, um, that allows them to notify us through our yard management system when the equipment's en route or is arrived here, that it needs, it's a preventative maintenance schedule. Every fleet has a different protocol, yet, we can put that protocol into our system, and then it communicates through their telematic device, which is communicating with their enterprise system, right? And allows us to, more efficiently attend to that piece of equipment once it's on one of our terminals.
Well, and I think that's kind of the name of the game, is to be more proactive in a variety of ways, especially when it comes to maintenance. Because in my mind, I kind of think that if you have an idea of when a unit needs to go in for maintenance, you can plan around that. Right? Instead of it
Ye-
just
ye-
going down and then you have to react to that, and then you have to try to figure out the solution around it. I would assume that being proactive is gonna help with that. So, are people really shifting from a reactive to proactive mindset, or is it taking some education? Is it taking some of the implementation of these tools to really showcase how businesses can stay ahead of the game being proactive rather than reactive?
what we see is it's about 50-50, right? I think, once we start having discussion with a potential customer and learn what systems they're using and how that ties into our system and our network, some of them are technologically advanced in the sense that, they come to, the meeting and say, hey, this is what we're using, how does that tie in with your system? And it makes for a very efficient, transition into using our network. um, Others, it ends up us asking all the questions, like how do you keep track of, where your units are and when they need maintenance? And they show you this spreadsheet and you're like, oh boy. uh, you know how often do we update the spreadsheet? And then we coach them in how to use our portal, and then eventually they can get away from those spreadsheets. Um, so it and, and right now, you know more than ever, uh, we are seeing a lot more fleets focusing on, setting a very stringent protocol around using their system to,
Hmm.
uh, you know work. I'm not a very good IT person, but work with our system so that,
Mhm.
they can improve their uptime through the
Mhm.
notifications that we get from, all of the maintenance softwares and telematic devices that are monitoring the truck or the refrigeration unit while it's in
Well,
transit.
and that makes a lot of sense too, right? Because I've been talking a lot about how tech stacks are growing. And so I
Hmm.
think more and more you're going to see that that your customers are going to want to protect the tools that they're currently using, and then try
Hmm.
to integrate with yours to share the data so that they're not necessarily training their whole team on a whole new process. But if they're using spreadsheets, I mean, some of those questions that you mentioned are super important. And if they're using spreadsheets, they definitely, especially in 2025, want to look at other ways to be able to manage that, because at the end of the day, the data is in those spreadsheets and they're not really in a place that is usable for them. Can you give us some examples of how customers have leveraged some of these tools to navigate challenges and maybe achieve some of those big results? I know you gave us some percentages earlier, but I want to hear some more.
We have one customer. It's a major private fleet. They've unified their storage and maintenance at our Southern California terminals. Um, and one of the first big steps and hurdles that we got through was integrating um, RYMS data with their telematics. And they've told us that that's cut their downtime by 30%, through proactive repairs
Wow.
and optimizing their parking utilization, because in big markets like Southern California and DFW, um, what I call freight corridors aren't necessarily tied together, right? So you've got to optimize the parking utilizations, and you're going to save thousands of dollars in idle costs by having your equipment in the right area. We've had customers recently in Texas tell us that our offsite services have offset their pickup and delivery delays. And they were able to boost their on-time deliveries by about 25%.
Hmm.
So those wins show how unification drives efficiency and resilience.
Mhm. Well, we've got
Yep.
some really good questions. I see Camilo, I see Mike, I also see Ryan. Since we're talking about TSG and we're talking about what you have done for some of your clients, I am going to ask Ryan's question right now before we get into the next segment.
Oh
And so
boy.
Ryan says there are a lot of vendors in this space, but at Prime, we've seen firsthand how TSG operates at a different level when it comes to responsiveness, reliability, and keeping our equipment secure. What do you think truly sets TSG apart from others when it comes to helping fleets stay unified, on time, and protected? Great question.
Yes,
I love the
great
question.
question. Thank you, Ryan. We appreciate Prime's business. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know why, but I go back to the story from earlier this week about the Nintendo Switch robbery, right? The cargo
Mhm,
theft story. Um, and the first thing that jumped out at me about that story was that, the driver was, along his route somewhere, right? He was parked in an unattended lot,
mhm,
um, with no security. And I think one of the things that we really pride ourselves on here is having a secure lot, right? I mean, that's cargo theft. In that scenario, that ended up in a almost $1.5 million loss.
mhm,
Um, we prevent those events by having fully secured, lit, manned facilities with an automatic gate system, right? We capture a picture of the driver, the license plate, the motor carrier number, the chassis number, the container number. I mean, all of it, right? So we get a picture. I think I mentioned of the driver, and so we're able to prevent those issues. I think typically when fleets come in and out of our facilities, uh, you see, an operation that we're keeping track of everything, right? So it kind of prevents the bad guys from even coming into the facility.
mhm,
And the way our system works is that if you're not in the system, you're not really allowed to get into the facility.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think that's peace of mind is probably one of the you can't put a number on it, right? But it's
That's true.
it's I mean, but in this case you can, $1.5 million worth of cargo theft. Had that been here, it wouldn't have happened.
I
Or
love that.
another lot. Yeah.
Well, and
Hmm.
you take security very seriously. I mean, that's something that is top of mind for a lot of organizations. We talked about it on Tuesday about how everything is so integrated, right? There's a lot of IoT around units and around trucks, and they're getting very sneaky. And
Oh
they
yeah.
can send you an email from what looks like a legit email to move a load, and it could potentially go into a different location. And you actually thwarted one of those recently because you told us on Tuesday. Do you want to tell that story again?
Yes, we had we have a drayage, a regional haul division, a trucking company that I also own, and intermodal shippers group, and we had an incident where we received an email from the customer, or what appeared to be from the customer, um, that the load for the next day, instead of going to Phoenix, was actually being rerouted to Los Angeles. Um, so, at the time, we were like, okay, the dispatcher rerouted the truck the next morning to Los Angeles, and While it was en route, we were communicating with the customer that, his ETA to this address in Los Angeles is X. And they said, wait, Los Angeles? Why is he going to Los Angeles? He's supposed to be going to Phoenix. And um, right then and there, the driver was notified that there was a discrepancy. And within minutes, we found out from our customer security division that an email had been hacked. And so that was an
Mm,
invalid request. And at the time, the driver was arriving to where the attempted cargo theft was going to happen. And between our operations team and our customer security team, they immediately uh, had the LA sheriff on site, and the bad guys were arrested. They never got the freight, and it ended up going to Phoenix the next day. And so everybody,
yeah.
you know, it ended well, but it doesn't always end well.
Right. Well, and I think this is a good point to make around making sure that you have the right partners that are thinking about the right things. Right?
Yes.
And have safeguards in place to be able to say, "Hey, wait a second. This doesn't necessarily look right. Let me make sure that we're doing the right thing," and double checking and second guessing some of the requests that come in. And especially when you've got security front of mind, those are the type of partners like TSG Fleet that you want to align yourself with, because these are the results that can happen when you do. And I think it's really important to talk about it. So when Ryan says what sets you apart, I think between those two stories really showcase what that looks like. Now, I want to go back and talk a little bit about capacity. And remember, everybody, if you've got any questions, put them in the comments. We will be getting to those just a little bit later on in the conversation. Um, it's it's really vital, I think, when it comes to capacity, that we take a strategic look at fleet utilization, right? If they want to make an impact, if they want to cut costs, like we're talking about, everybody's looking at the bottom line. You mentioned earlier that right now capacity is a little bit flat. And so that's kind of the challenge of the environment at the moment. But as we go into the rest of 2025, there's some optimism there, and that things should be rebalancing itself and coming back. So I think talking about right sizing and optimizing your fleet capacity should be able to help with that. But when we talk about right sizing and optimizing, what do you mean by that? Because I want to make sure everybody's on the same page when they're thinking about capacity, when they're thinking about optimizing the fleet. So talk to me about that.
Well, it really means, aligning your fleet size and composition to actual demand. So eliminating excess, units while ensuring you have enough for those peaks. Um, you know, and like I mean, we go back to it again. Optimizing involves maximizing utilization through better routing, storage, and maintenance to reduce idle time and costs. Um, it's difficult when capacity is where it's at today, because you know typically fleets, they build up their capacity during really good years. Like we had a great run from 2020 to 2022, where containers and trailers and trucks and everything that makes it all go were you know there were back orders, right? Because you couldn't get enough to
Right.
to to support the volume or the capacity. And now I think what we're seeing is they're the good fleets, or the ones that are proactive and technologically advanced. They're using a data-driven process to make their fleets leaner and more efficient, and making sure uh, you're utilizing the bulk of your fleet in markets where maybe the capacity isn't as bad as it is in other markets.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about capacity and fleet optimization, where does EVs stand on this? And I know that we're going to talk about sort of the cost between EVs and regular diesel trucks a little bit later on, because that was a question that we had on Tuesday. But when we think about fleet optimization, where does EVs sort of fit in that? And I'm throwing this one at you because we didn't talk about this ahead of time. But I know there's a lot of people thinking about electric vehicles when it comes to trucks, right? There's some, I think, grants out there that can help with that. Should we be thinking about it? Should we not be thinking about it?
I would lean towards the not thinking about it. Um, I mean, in California, we are or we're at, I mean, it might be past tense now, at the epicenter of the, commercial electric vehicle uh, craze, if you want to call it that. I think, we had someone who pointed out, you know, that an electric vehicle or an electric truck has significantly less maintenance cost associated with it.
Mhm.
Um, when you talk about maintenance costs, I think you also have to talk about how you utilize the asset. So we go back to utilization, right? Because if you're saving money on maintenance because it's an electric truck, yet that electric truck can't run a full day's worth of business without going and charging or switching it out. I just was recently with someone in LA on Tuesday who made who received a significant grant and bought about 50 electric trucks, and he was highlighting his frustrations with the inability to run his normal business because of the trucks. When you put a 40, $60,000 load on it, it really reduces its availability to about 4 hours. So what do you do with that? If you're typically your driver's working a 10 to 14 hour day, and
Mhm.
now you put them in a truck, or him or her in a truck that can only do 4 hours worth of that work, without creating another system, right? Whereby, in this case, okay, well, then we'll get the truck back here to the terminal, we'll put it on a charger, switch it out. That increases your cost by 100%, right? So
Mhm.
you went from a 10 to 14-hour workday nonstop, right? You usually have enough diesel fuel to cover your day. Um, and now you've got an electric truck that the battery needs to be charged, maybe switch the driver, maybe switch the truck. There's a lot of downtime there. And you can't change your rate because of it. People aren't paying
Right.
higher rates because you have an electrical truck. Um,
Mhm.
so if you have big EV plans, my recommendation is to wait, and see what
Mm.
happens, because right now I don't think it's a sustainable model. I mean, I know fleets that have several electrical vehicles, and the battery alone costs $60,000, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
Um, so, and there's, I don't want to, you know, throw any of the OEMs under the bus, but there's some that they don't have the battery replacement sitting on the shelf, right?
Right.
So, you have a sixty
Well,
thousand
that's a
dollar
lot of
problem that you,
capital,
yeah,
right?
and
I
if
mean, if
you have
you think
50
about it,
trucks, yeah,
sixty
exactly.
sixty
And
thousand dollars if we go back to sort of inventory and having those kind of batteries on
no,
shelf
they're not
for
sitting
when
on
you
the
need
shelf
it, you
anywhere.
know?
There's trucks waiting for them, and they can't get them. And that's the biggest issue right now, is the battery. And look, it's new technology, like anything else, right? Whether it's the iPhone and or anything else related to technology, it's new. So, they thought they made a battery that would
Mhm.
get the job done, and that just hasn't proven to be the case yet.
So interesting. And I'm glad that you answered that question for me, because when we think about, getting our fleets ready for that capacity to come back, what does that look like? Are we, looking at older vehicles that might need maintenance? Are we looking at investing in EV? I mean, fleets look a lot different, and everybody's sort of planning for that. And so how do we plan for that? What does that look like? What are some of the right questions that we should be asking when we want to be looking at bringing our fleet together, and then that fleet unification piece, right?
Yes.
So where do you think businesses start? Like I sort of talked about, like, what are the right questions, but how do you really evaluate the fleet that you have right now to identify opportunities for optimization? Um, and why would they go to TSG Fleet for that?
Well, I think the first answer is you've got to start with a comprehensive audit of your fleet and your network, right? You want to know which lanes that you're making the most money in, right? And then you want to track your utilization rates in those lanes. In addition to that, you want to look at, whatever your system is for tracking maintenance costs. You want to make sure that, what is your cost associated with running those lanes. Um, and I think a lot of that data is probably, tied up in different silos in their enterprise systems and their telematic technology, as well as all the maintenance tracking that they do in their enterprise system. So I think, in the process of doing an audit like that, you want to make sure that you're finding a solution that gets it to where you can pull the data together. And maybe this is the one time, maybe you can export that to a spreadsheet. Maybe you can use a spreadsheet for that. you know, the spreadsheets are still useful, and I think a lot of systems, what we see is you can export that data, right? And then
Mhm.
if you've got, somebody on the team that can run great pivot tables and look at all that data. And I think that's where you start, a holistic solution is okay, we're getting all this information. And then you can come to a TSG, or come to us at TSG. And then, with that data, we can help provide, a scalable storage and maintenance solution, and even work with analyzing all your needs across your network, right? I mean, we're not in every market yet. We're still growing, but we can give you recommendations for consolidation, and all those things. They free up capital and they improve your efficiency. So that's the type of things that we're doing to work with our customers.
How important is location? Like I see Mike's question over here, and Mike says, "How many locations do you operate in SoCal and Texas, and why are they key for fleet performance?" So that kind of goes hand in hand with the question around location. How important is location when sort of analyzing your fleets? Yeah.
Oh, it's super important, and I probably spend a quarter to half my time thinking about our future locations. And my parameters are fairly simple, right? I mean, if you're familiar with Southern California, there's not any what I'd call a transportation corridor near Newport Beach or Laguna Beach, right? So when you're thinking of a location and where you want to be as a fleet, you want to be near ports, right? Railroad hubs, and then where all the distribution and consolidation happens for all the major beneficial cargo areas. Um, Fortunately, in Southern California and DFW, that's where we're at. We're within minutes of either the BNSF Railroad or the UPL Road or the KC it's Southern, and we're near all the Amazon and Walmart distribution centers. So I know you can get a solution that's way off the beaten path, and those rates associated with being way off the beaten path, they might sound at you like, "Whoa, we can spend half as much on our parking and our maintenance if we're uh, you know 50 miles away from everything." But what you also have to take into consideration is you have to pay a driver to go those extra 50
Mhm.
miles.
Yeah.
That's hundreds of
So
dollars.
true.
So
So true.
you want to take all those things into consideration when you're picking a location.
Well, and I think that sort of drives into the next part of the conversation because I want to talk about how all of this ties into customer experience, right? Customer
Yes.
retention, customer satisfaction, loyalty. You're talking about being close to the action. And what
Yes.
that really translates into is delivery speed and being able to communicate when something is going to be or land at your customer, but doing it quickly because that's kind of what everybody is expecting, right? So,
Yes.
talk to us about how when we unify our fleets, when we bring operational efficiency through using the right tools, aligning ourselves with the right partners, how does that directly impact customer satisfaction? Like, what does that look like for you and your customers? I don't know if you have any examples to share around customer satisfaction, how you've helped your customer do that, but I'm sure there's an impact there, and I want to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, it all goes to operational efficiency, and that translates to reliability, right? Not just for our customers, but the customers, our customers, if that makes
Yeah.
sense, right? So
Yeah.
they can provide accurate ETAs, they have fewer delays, and all that consistent service provide, it builds trust, right? So our customers trust us to be in the right place at the right time. And what we see is by having unified maintenance and terminal space, it ensures that our customers are always road ready. It directly boosts their delivery performance and reduces their customers' frustration from disruptions. Um,
Hmm.
and that's how we think here at TSG is like, we see the next customer. Does that make sense? So, a lot of people, they're just looking at their one customer that's right in front of them, right?
Hmm.
But here you have to realize, especially in the freight industry, your customer has several other customers, right?
Hmm.
And you don't want your customer to tell all their customers that, hey, because of where we parked our equipment or who's doing the maintenance, we're delayed. We're having issues. We don't have enough equipment to support your business because, our TSG vendor like person is
Or
not keeping up to it.
the product
Yes.
was stolen and we can't deliver it.
Yeah, or the product was stolen. Yeah. So you never want it to come back on us, and that's really what, I think, building that trust with our customers, right? So they can keep their promise with their customers.
I think for the next one, we have to have Mike on with us talking about your relationship with Prime and how you've helped them and all that kind of stuff. I'm putting Mike on the spot here, but anyway, or sorry, it was
Definitely.
Ryan, not Mike,
Right.
Ryan.
Brian, yes.
We
That's
have to talk
awesome.
to him next time. All right. So I want to get to some of our audience questions. If you have a pressing question, you haven't put it in the comment, now is your time to do that because we're going to spend time on a few questions that we've got here. I've got some over on my personal LinkedIn as well. So let's start with this one. So Andrea says, what initiatives has your company taken to reduce environmental impact of your fleet, and how do you measure their effectiveness? Now, this is important, right? Because a lot of companies are thinking about sustainability. They all have sustainability goals. And so when they're aligning with current partners, they're really asking you questions about this. So can you answer this one?
I'll do my best. When it comes to sustainability, we really take our lead from our customers, right? We're in an interesting place where, we don't use the fuel we provide, or we don't drive the trucks or purchase the trucks that they decide to purchase or not. Um, I think, we really take the lead from our customers in terms of what are their sustainability goals. Um, and if that's related to, minimizing their carbon footprint, I think where we come in is, providing, an efficient location so that, they're spending less empty miles, as we call them, right? Because those empty
Mm-hmm.
miles, is something that doesn't contribute to sustainability. You're just wasting fuels and emissions, and I think that's how we best help, offset, their, or not offset, but contribute to their sustainability goals.
Yeah, well, and the efficiency that you create through all of the things that we've talked about today really helps with that as well. I have a question from another part of the audience. How do I get buy-in from stakeholders and drivers when unifying fleet programs? I think this is a really good question because
This
if
is
we
a
think
great
about
question.
well, if we think about like technology implementation, right? It's 80% people, 20% the technology, and this is kind of the same thing.
Yes, I think the buy-in comes when, one of the other things that we often think about when we implement an upgrade to our technology, for example, that we use here, whether it's what we're doing in the shop or our gate operations. Um, you know, in a lot of instances, our customers' drivers or their third-party drivers are our end user. So we want to make the the I don't know, not the stay here, but in the transition of where they come to our facilities, come in and out of our facilities, we want to make it as convenient as possible, right? We don't want them to be wasting time. One of the things that we always strive for is because, owning a trucking company myself, driver's frustration starts when things take extra time. So
Hmm.
that's going somewhere and you don't have ready equipment. or you get to the gate and it takes you 20 minutes to get in and out of the gate because the technology just isn't efficient.
Mhm.
So that we're always trying to drive down the amount of time the driver spends on the terminal. We want the driver to come in and get out as easy as possible, and a lot goes into that. Not just technology. I mean, just in terms of keeping the yard neat and clean. At the terminal,
Mhm.
if a driver has to come into an unorganized facility with trash everywhere and potholes and mud and all those things, that takes extra time,
Mm.
and that all gets related back to the customer. Um, so I think that by focusing on making the driver's job easier and more efficient, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, and I never really thought about that, but the condition of a yard is a reflection of that business because at the end of the day, if they're driving through potholes and it's creating additional maintenance and then downtime, right? It's like a domino effect.
Oh
So
yeah,
you really want to make sure that the condition of, especially for those drivers, is, I think, a really important point to make.
definitely.
All right,
Mhm.
maybe not last question. We've got a couple more. So, how do rising maintenance and fuel costs impact budgeting decisions? Like, what steps do you think that people can take to optimize overall fleet expenses? This is a big question. Everybody's thinking about it
Yes,
right now.
yes. I well, I think the best thing you can do is what we do is we're always trying to analyze the data with our customers, right? So, is it what maintenance costs are increasing, right? Because there's several components to your maintenance cost and they don't all increase at the same time. So you want to focus on the certain costs that are increasing. And when it comes to fuel cost, I think on a weekly basis, we're working with our vendor, right? We buy fuel in bulk to provide to our customers. So, we want to make sure that if there's any programs out there that allow us to get more scale, and what we've learned by bringing our customers into that conversation, especially larger fleet like Ryan's, for example, at Prime, we were able to get into a fuel program that was really their fuel program, but since they have a much bigger network nationwide, the economies of scale help drive down, our fuel costs, where we operate. And then essentially we were able to not only give those fuel savings back to, Ryan's fleet, also other customers,
Hmm.
benefited from that connection. And I think it's just about visibility. You have to stay on top of it. It doesn't do any good, after your quarterly meeting with your manager to call me and say, "Oh my gosh, we're getting killed on maintenance costs." That that always leads to, a headache, right? Whereas if you're communicating daily and weekly with your vendor and your customers, um, and you prevent those big jumps, right, from happening. And because then, if you wait several months to address it, then it's, any solution's not going to really be a satisfactory solution. Whereas if you're addressing it weekly, if not weekly, hopefully monthly, then it's something that prevents, those huge fluctuations in cost.
Well, I also think collaboration too, right? If there's
Yes.
opportunities for a win-win-win situation, that's where you need to align with the right partner so that you're on the same page and you can talk about these things and bring opportunities to the table and see what would work, what wouldn't work. I mean, I did an introduction for you just the other day, and I'm hoping that that's going to help you as well. And that's kind of what this business is all about, right? Is networking, bringing everybody
Yes.
together, presenting opportunities, and just sort of seeing where they can go from there. All right, last question, I
Mhm.
think. So, this is from another one of our platforms. Can I integrate all my telematics, fuel cards, maintenance tracking, and reporting in all in one place? Is this something that is possible?
Yes, it's possible. I might need to follow up and give a specific solution or product. I can't, but we yes, it's possible. It's very possible. It's out there. You can do it.
Okay, awesome. And then one more question from Juan, going back to what we said about your locations in Southern California and Dallas Fort Worth. Why are those the right locations to help fleets run better?
Well, I mean, with where our locations are, we're in transportation heavy ecosystems, right? So what does that mean? That means our customers are here. They don't have to spend extra time driving from their depot where they receive all their maintenance needs to the final delivery or to get an empty unit to go make a pickup. That also means that parts are readily available when needed, and usually the staff and the team that works on that terminal is from that area. So there's not, we don't have, a lot of people that, have a hard time getting to and from work. So we're here, we're here, we're available. And it makes the transportation process seamless for everybody.
Yeah, and just easier. Okay, one last question for you. What's one thing, just one thing, Trace, that you want everybody to walk away from this conversation either thinking about or taking action on?
Well, I don't think we said it enough. Unify your fleet. Assess your operation for fragmentation, and partner with experts like TSG. I mean, we're not. I mean, you're not the only one out there. I have competitors that are doing a great job as well, helping fleets consolidate and optimize. And the final result of that is resilience, right? In this market, and I think it's just not about surviving. It's about thriving and, using efficiency and innovation to do that.
Awesome. Well, I'm having more and more conversations about fleet management. I'm really enjoying it. I think there's a growing trend of leaders looking at their operations more holistically and hearing how you're helping drive efficiency, cut costs, boost customer experience, create competitive advantage, all through fleet management is great. So, if you want to find out more about how you could unify your fleet to streamline operations, cut costs, and deliver on time, head over to tsgfleet.com and check them out. A big thank you to all of you for listening, watching, commenting. We could not do any of this without you. And Trace, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing all your insights today.
Thanks again for having me. I'm looking forward to having more conversations on this topic and in others.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.